The Route That Remembers. The strange, sacred, and revolutionary story of Ibogaine. The moment history shifted, 10 days ago, something happened in the Oval Office that would have seemed like pure science fiction just 5 years before. President Donald Trump sat down at the Resolute desk and signed an executive order that, for the first time in American history, explicitly named a Schedule I psychedelic, Ibogaine, and directed the full machinery of the federal government to pursue it as medicine. Standing in the room was Joe Rogan, whose role in the moment he described with characteristic bluntness. "I sent President Trump some information," Rogan said from the Oval. "The text message that came back. Sounds great. Do you want FDA approval? Let's do it. Literally that quick." It was absurd. It was very American, and it may have been one of the most consequential moments in the history of psychedelic medicine. On April 18, 2026, Trump signed the executive order, stating it would dramatically accelerate access to new medical research and treatments based on psychedelic drugs. The order directs the FDA to prioritize review of psychedelic compounds, instructs the DEA and other federal agencies to reduce restrictions that may hamper research, and allocates $50 million for federal-state collaboration. Specifically, the FDA and DEA were directed to facilitate and establish a pathway for eligible patients to access Ibogaine compounds under the Right to Try Act, including any necessary Schedule I handling authorizations for treating physicians and researchers. FDA Commissioner Marty Makary confirmed that investigational new drug clearance had already been issued for Ibogaine, meaning the drug can now be shipped to clinical investigators across state lines as research continues. Drugs can get approved in weeks, not a year or a year plus, but in weeks if they are in line with our national priorities, he said. To understand why this matters, why veterans, addiction researchers, and Gabonese elders all have skin in this game, you have to go back to where Ibogaine actually comes from. The plant at the edge of the world, in the dense rainforest of Gabon and the Congo Basin, grows a shrub that looks, by all appearances, unremarkable. Tabernanthe iboga reaches maybe 2 meters tall. It produces small yellow flowers and orange fruit. Its leaves are nothing special, but the root bark, that's another matter entirely. Archaeological evidence from charcoal traces in a Gabonese cave suggests indigenous people have used the plant for at least 2,000 years. For the Bwiti people of Gabon, Cameroon, and the Republic of the Congo, iboga is not a drug. It is a teacher. It is the spine of a spiritual tradition built around initiation, healing, and communion with ancestors. Within their initiatory traditions, iboga is not regarded as a drug, but as a teacher. To the Bwiti, iboga contains a plant spirit believed to reveal truth, confront suffering, and restore moral alignment within the community. A Bwiti initiation is not casual. It involves days of fasting, ritual preparation, music, the Ngombe harp played through the night, and the consumption of large quantities of iboga root bark. The initiate enters a visionary state that can last 24 to 36 hours, during which they are said to meet their ancestors, confront their own death, and return transformed. The ceremony is considered a death and rebirth. You go in as one person. You come out as someone else. The community considers this literal, not metaphorical. Westerners did not encounter iboga seriously until the 19th century, when French explorers and missionaries began cataloging the rituals of Gabon. By the early 20th century, the alkaloid ibogaine had been isolated from the plant. For a brief, strange window in the 1960s, a French pharmaceutical company sold it as a mild stimulant under the brand name Lamborghini, used by athletes and soldiers. Then the counterculture arrived. Ibogaine got lumped in with the broader psychedelic panic, and in 1970, the United States dropped it into Schedule I, the federal tomb for substances deemed to have no medical use and high abuse potential. There it sat, officially, for 56 years. The addiction whisperer. What brought Ibogaine back from the dead was a crisis the government couldn't ignore: opioids. In the late 1980s, a young heroin addict named Howard Lotsof accidentally discovered that after taking Ibogaine, which he obtained through a research contact, his withdrawal symptoms had simply stopped. Not diminished, stopped. The craving that had defined his existence for years was gone. He spent the rest of his life trying to get anyone in power to listen.
Oh my God. I gotta tell someone about this.
Ibogaine directly interacts with the brain's neurochemistry by binding to the NMDA, kappa opioid, and serotonin receptors. By modulating these pathways, it effectively resets the brain's tolerance levels to their pre-addiction state. Within just hours of administration, patients often report a complete cessation of opioid withdrawal symptoms, a feat that traditional tapering medications take months to achieve poorly. Think about what that means. Opioid withdrawal is one of the most physically brutal experiences in medicine. Days of bone pain, vomiting, insomnia, and psychological agony that drives people back to the needle just to make it stop. Ibogaine appears to interrupt that process at the receptor level, essentially telling the nervous system, reset, but the mechanism goes much deeper than receptor binding. The neurochemistry, what's actually happening in the brain here, is where Ibogaine starts to look less like a drug and more like a biological intervention that evolution never designed for. Something that found the back door to neurological renewal. Ibogaine does not fit neatly into existing pharmacological categories. It interacts with multiple neurotransmitter systems simultaneously, including opioid, serotonin, NMDA, and nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. That's a pharmacological fingerprint, unlike almost anything else. Most psychiatric drugs work on one system. Ibogaine works on many simultaneously. And what emerges from that complexity is something researchers are still working to fully understand. The most clinically dramatic effect is the withdrawal interruption. But the most scientifically exciting finding is what Ibogaine appears to do to the brain's repair systems. Research published in Frontiers in Pharmacology demonstrated that Ibogaine increases expression of glial cell line-derived neurotrophic factor, GDNF, in the ventral tegmental area, a region central to reward processing. It also upregulates brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, transcript expression across multiple brain regions, including the prefrontal cortex, nucleus accumbens, and substantia nigra. BDNF supports neuron survival, encourages new neural connections, and plays critical roles in learning and memory. GDNF and BDNF are essentially the brain's fertilizer. They're the proteins that tell neurons to grow, survive, and form new connections. This neurotrophic effect could help repair some of the neural damage caused by years of substance use. You're not just stopping the bleeding, you might be helping the wound actually heal.
This is a damaged neuron, affected by years of substance use. Ibogaine promotes neurotrophic effects, stimulating repair and growth. This could help repair neural damage from substance use.
Then Ibogaine metabolizes into something called noribogaine. And this is where the story gets even stranger. Noribogaine acts primarily as a serotonin reuptake inhibitor and opioid receptor modulator. Many researchers believe this is what drives the sustained reduction in cravings and the mood stabilization that people describe in the weeks following treatment. And noribogaine remains active for days to weeks after the initial experience ends. Noribogaine has been classified as a psychoplastogen, a compound that may promote the growth of new neural connections in cortical neurons. The brain, in other words, is briefly made more plastic, more willing to reorganize itself, to abandon old patterns, to write new ones.
The symbolic framing of death and rebirth in Bwiti traditions can be viewed as broadly consistent with modern interpretations of transient windows of heightened neuroplasticity.
The neuroscientists and the shamans, separated by centuries and continents, arrived at the same description through completely different methods. The Stanford study that changed everything, the political momentum you're seeing right now, didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of one study that produced numbers too extraordinary to dismiss. A prospective observational study out of Stanford examined psychedelic-assisted therapy in combat veterans with traumatic brain injury. The study used a magnesium ibogaine protocol and enrolled 30 male Special Operations Forces veterans. Published in Nature Medicine in 2024, it reported average reductions of 88% in PTSD symptoms, 87% in depression symptoms, and 81% in anxiety symptoms at 1 month, with no serious adverse events. 88% reduction in PTSD. For a population of Special Operations veterans who had tried everything conventional medicine offered. The brains of these veterans were measurably younger on neuroimaging 1 month after Ibogaine treatment. These numbers are why Rick Perry, who personally witnessed veterans transform after Ibogaine therapy in Mexico, became the chairman of Americans for Ibogaine.
How Rick Perry became a fervent advocate for the psychedelic Ibogaine. I was skeptical at first, but the science behind Ibogaine changed my mind. This could revolutionize addiction treatment.
The spiritual experience, death, rebirth, and the voice of the root. The clinical numbers are extraordinary. But anyone who has actually gone through an Ibogaine session will tell you the clinical description misses the point entirely. People who have Ibogaine treatment typically describe an initial visual phase lasting 1 to 4 hours, followed by an introspective phase that can last several hours to days. But those words, visual and introspective, are clinical euphemisms for something far more destabilizing and profound. What patients consistently describe is a waking dream state in which they witness their own life, often played back as a kind of film they cannot control. Scenes they buried, traumas they armored over, moments of choice, consequence, and causality shown to them in a way that strips all the narrative self-protection away.
What's happening to me? You never listen!
I'm sorry, Dad.
This is my chance after God. Why did I do it?
You don't remember your childhood abuse. You relive it, and you understand it from every angle simultaneously. You see the chain, you see yourself in it, you see the way forward out of it. During the acute phase, individuals often report vivid visions and profound introspective or mystical experiences accompanied by temporary ataxia and nausea. The Bwiti regard this experience as not merely psychological, but as genuine contact with an intelligence in the plant itself.
The Bwiti know Ibogaine is not just in the mind. It is contact with the spirit of the plant. A true intelligence guiding us in the forest.
Veterans who've traveled to clinics in Mexico describe meeting the people they killed in combat.
You took everything from me.
Why did this happen to us?
Addicts describe sitting with the version of themselves they became and being forgiven by the version they were before.
This is what I became. This is the price we paid. Can you forgive me? I forgive you. Find peace.
People with depression describe understanding not as a concept, but as a felt reality, that their pain was never who they were. Whether that's neurochemistry producing a hallucination or something genuinely ontological is a question Ibogaine refuses to answer for you. It insists you sit with the uncertainty. The Texas Bet and the Federal Moonshot Texas is launching its own research program using $50 million the legislature invested last year, partnering with statewide medical researchers after state officials couldn't find a private company willing to take on the full scope of drug development. The requirements they'd set, FDA approval pathway, Texas corporate presence, matched funding, 20% of future revenue, were too steep. So Texas is simply going to do it themselves. Americans for Ibogaine helped drive Texas's $100 million combined investment in Ibogaine clinical trials, the largest publicly funded psychedelic research initiative in history. The federal executive order matches that with another $50 million through ARPA-H, the government's high-risk research arm modeled on DARPA. Legal scholars note that the executive order doesn't automatically reschedule Ibogaine. Ibogaine remains a Schedule I-controlled substance, and that gap between political momentum and legal reality sits at the center of everything happening with Ibogaine right now. But the order mandates the Attorney General initiate rescheduling review the moment any psychedelic compound completes Phase 3 trials. The runway is being built. The closing question. For 2,000 years, a plant sat in the forest of Central Africa, holding a kind of knowledge about trauma, about addiction, about the architecture of the human mind, that Western medicine was not equipped to ask for. The Bwiti did not need clinical trials to know what Iboga could do. They built an entire civilization of healing around it. Now the United States government, prodded by a text message from Joe Rogan, is finally beginning to ask the right questions. What Ibogaine seems to offer, across the neurochemistry and the spirituality both, is something that almost no other medicine attempts. Not symptom management, but confrontation. a forced reckoning with the self that the brain, under ordinary conditions, will do almost anything to avoid. Whether that confrontation leads to healing depends on what the person does with what they find. The route doesn't promise you salvation, it just makes sure you can't look away. That, perhaps, is why the Bwiti have always called it a teacher, and why it has taken Western science 2 millennia to arrive at the same classroom door.